So there are some serious misconceptions regarding the idea of quote unquote do nothing meditation, which comes in sort of a variety of forms and a variety of names, and is often confused with what I call surrender. And the idea of do nothing meditation or its varieties is that you simply uh, let go of all effort. And that's the practice that leads to enlightenment, basically. Um, And it sounds very similar to surrender as I teach it, which is ignoring thought. But there are some key subtle differences that I think ought to be regarded, and there's sort of different misconceptions and different varieties of this idea that distinguish it from true surrender as the seeker ought to practice it. So the first of these misconceptions is that one can really put in no effort. And this is incorrect because what you need to do, even if you are surrendering, is to cultivate a consistent concentration essentially on a single thought, which is that thought of surrender, or if you're ignoring thought, the thought of ignoring thought. Everything else can be relaxed, but there ought to be a consistent, every waking moment focus on attempting to give up effort in all other domains. You have to hold to that one thread. And the reason is if you don't hold to that single thread, that single intentional, effortful, concentrated thought on ignoring thought or on surrender, if you simply let all quote unquote effort go, then you're simply allowing the mental habits to reassert themselves without any kind of check on them. Those mental habits will come in and will distract you. And if you have no pre-existing effort to sort of keep you grounded in a certain central thought, which is the thought of ignoring thought, before you know it, you'll be swept away to sea. Hours and days will pass, and you won't have kept the practice. So even if the goal is to relax and to not put in effort, a single filament of effort has to be kept intensely, and that filament of effort is the effort to relax. I'm going to focus on the effort to relax in every moment and keep alert, keep attentive to that. And that eventually is what will burn up the other mental habits that keep you attached to your normal way of being and doing things, and eventually even that last little filament will burn itself up. But you can't simply do nothing, because that is simply being as you already are, which is to say, at the superficial level, simply going with your current set of mental habits. And only when you remember relaxing, that's not sufficient. That's not sufficient to fundamentally break down the way of doing things. Intense concentration is required. If it's not on self-inquiry, then it has to be intense concentration on the idea of relaxation. It has to be intense concentration on, supposing you had kept your hand balled in a fist your whole life, now you have to remember, unclench. And you don't just remember it when you notice your hand clenched. You keep it in mind every second. Keep it unclenched, 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 effectively. That is what real surrender, real ignoring thought as a seeker has to be. Now, it is still an effortful exercise. That effort will eventually destroy itself in realization. As long as you believe you're a seeker, effort must be exerted. Effort will be taken from you, the full degree of effort, that will be taken from you involuntarily. If you simply do nothing, again, you will simply be allowing yourself to be swept away by currents of the mind without any kind of anchor. Another misconception regarding surrender and doing nothing is that doing nothing means resisting the eruption of thought. That you are shutting the mind down. You're clenching it and you're shutting it down. And the old Zen master Hakuin hundreds of years ago pointed this out as a problem, right? This idea that simply repressing all thought, so to say, all conscious thought, that state was the state to be admired as the path to enlightenment. He mocked that idea. And the reason is, it isn't, because you're not engaging in the distinction between thought and what you really are. By closing off the mind to thought, you're perpetuating the idea that you are, in fact, a particular state, right? There's a certain state of the mind that is desirable, and that's the state of locked out of thought. But actually, what you're trying to do with either inquiry or surrender is to discern that regardless of what thought or feeling flows through your mind, there is a dimension or facet that is unchanged and unperturbed. And you can't get that if you're just closing off your mind. You're just simply sitting in a kind of little shell. What needs to happen is a kind of unclenching where things flow, but nevertheless, there's a kind of deliberate non-engagement with it, which is actually always the truth. It's always the fact of that non-engagement. So surrender, in the proper sense, does not involve stopping thought deliberately. It may stop. If you do relax your mind, it may incidentally stop at times. But that's not the purpose. The purpose is not to deliberately close off thought and stay in a no-thought zone, in the sort of tight manner. It is to relax and to allow things to come through, and you stay centered in the thought of relaxation. And a third sort of point in all this is just to reiterate the idea of doing nothing in meditation does not mean that you are giving up doership. There is an idea in spiritual awakening and enlightenment, of course, that one is not the doer, and that's true. One is not the doer. But the full recognition of that fact comes as the insight that you're seeking. It's not something that you can just force yourself to be. You can't force yourself not to be the doer. That would be a contradiction in terms, because you'd be doing that forcing. Even the idea of relaxation, I'm relaxing, that's a doing. I am relaxing. There's a notion implicit there that I am the doer. I am the doer and I am relaxing. You cannot escape doership simply by thinking I'm not the doer. You cannot escape doership simply by giving up the doer. Those are all just nonsensical concepts, because it's the doer illusion that's engaging in these ideas. So what has to happen is you accept as a seeker that I am the doer, but also keeping in the back of your mind that somehow I'm not, right? And that you'll understand that at some point. And then you engage in the doing of consistent, intense effort towards a single thought, which is either inquiry, which is the consistent focus, the chasing of the sense of the I, or in surrender, the continuous maintenance of the intention that I will not put any effort in. I'm going to relax. I'm going to ignore thought. All thought except for that one. That is the true surrender, not simply letting go and doing absolutely nothing, and not closing your mind off in a ball and not permitting any thought to come through.